Quality Award. Welcome to you both, and Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's very much our pleasure to join you and to be able to lead you on our alarm management journey. And I'd like to just start by showing you the first slide in terms of showing you where we've been on the journey and where that journey took us. We've had several publications go out on this particular piece, one in the Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing. We've also been on the front page of the Boston Globe, and we're identified as a model in meeting U.S. safety standards. You'll also see that we've been on NPR, we've been on BBC, several local television stations, and again, we were featured at the American Essential Hospitals receiving the Quality Award. But perhaps the biggest thing I wish to share with you is something that was stated by James Kelleher, who is the Vice President for the Emergency Cardiac Research Institute. And I quote, "This is one of the most simple yet most important monitoring-related projects that I have seen implemented over the past decade." So it's now our pleasure to take you on that journey.
Some of this, some of you may have already seen in several webinars we have done, but we wanted to touch briefly a little bit on some of the foundation of this work that we've done to lay the groundwork for alarm management programs, but also to give you some context of some of the recent work we've done related to tachycardia alarms and pulse oximetry. So we started looking at this in 2008, looking at standardization of devices and defaults, and made some incremental changes along the way. But in 2012, we were challenged to come up with a sort of a big approach to alarm management because these incremental changes hadn't really done much on the units in terms of making a big change in the alarm volume as well as the noise on the units. So we decided to convene our multidisciplinary group and really start looking at what can we do to safely decrease monitor alarms and audible alarms, particularly on the telemetry units. We picked those areas because of the geography of those units, as well as the fact that there's less monitoring available at each bedside, and felt that this was probably the best approach to identify what the risks are and help mitigate those. So some of the things we have seen is that our system utilizes several different types of alarms with different meanings and acuities. And one of the things that we felt was important was to understand what type of alarms were occurring and what were those alarms in context with patients and what could we do to safely eliminate those that were clinically insignificant. So part of what we did was to really look at the alarm data and pull those out to assess what types of alarms are occurring and make sure that we weren't missing anything for quality purposes and safety purposes. The other thing we did was serial observations of the staff, or what we called secret shoppers. So we had a team that would go by the unit and just observe the staff and their environment, see how they responded to the different levels of alarms. And one of the things that we found is that with the crisis or critical alarms, the staff would respond appropriately and immediately. But there was a large number of alarms that were warning or those that would self-reset that were clinically insignificant. And so the staff would sort of wait and see what would happen with those. But when we started looking at the numbers, that was the largest number of alarms that were occurring. So what happened is we had a large number of those insignificant alarms that were potentially drowning out crisis alarms or important alarms. So that led us to really start looking at what does the data tell us and how can we make these changes to make sure that we decrease that noise on the unit and make it safer. So by pulling the alarm data from the system, what we found was that those self-resetting alarms or warning alarms totaled over 137,000 alarms, and this is just for a 2-week period. And when we looked in total, we had quite a number of different types of alarms, but the smallest number seemed to be the crisis. So that led us to really look at, all right, how can we make these changes? So we pulled together our group, and we had many discussions and meetings about what's an appropriate alarm, what's a significant alarm, to help frame what are the changes we're going to make during our pilot. I apologize, this is a bit of an eye chart, but what we wanted to do is list all of the different defaults, whether it's parameter, arrhythmia, system, what have you, to understand what was the then current default setting, and then put that in context with what the proposed changes would be for the pilot. And we wanted to make sure that all staff understood these are the changes, these are why we're making them, and this is what we expect the results to be. And having that open for discussion was an important piece to make sure that we had ownership both at the senior administration and leadership level, but also on the unit, because the nursing staff had to live with these changes. So as we put this together, one of the things that we learned along the way is that it really needs to be transparent. And so one of the things we did was to make sure that we had a really robust task force to look at it. So we included physicians, residents, clinical instructors, clinical engineering, nursing, a wide variety of those on the unit to make sure that they understood what our attempt was with this pilot. But also we wanted to make sure that it was transparent upward. So we did several presentations to senior leadership and a number of different committees in the hospital to make sure that all understood this is what our goal is, this is how we're going about doing it, so that we had a number of different feedback points to make sure that we were on track. Another important piece we found is that the EMR order sets didn't really support some of the changes we want to make. And so Deb and her colleagues and others made significant changes in cooperation with IT to the order sets to make sure that as we're making changes, the order sets reflected some of those changes and made sense to the staff. And then our team handled a lot of the equipment default changes. So when we started looking at the pre-pilot changes, we were averaging 87,823 alarms. When we went in and made those changes where we level set some of those warning alarms and reduced those and elevated some warning alarms up to crisis so that we made every alarm actionable, we saw a dramatic drop in the overall alarms on the unit. It dropped 89% down to just under 10,000 per week, which is a significant change. What we also found was that there was significant changes in terms of how quiet it was on the unit. And anecdotally, the night that we made the changes, I was paged at 2 in the morning because it was determined that the system was broken because it wasn't alarming. And after my heart started beating again and made a few phone calls, we found out it was just quiet. So if we were to really look at some of the alarm data and break it out, so the left-hand side and the pie chart shows that we had 90% of those alarms were warning. And as we made those changes over to the right, we could see that they decreased quite a bit, but we increased the number of crisis alarms. But it was better alarms, and they were more actionable alarms. And some of the other features that we made in allowing the staff to manage those, which Deb will go over in a little bit, allowed us to see that all these actionable alarms were important alarms and they were vital and they were real, but it also allowed the staff to make significant changes per patient as needed so that we would decrease the amount of repeat alarms that would occur. I think one of the important things that we found is that a lot of the arrhythmia and heart rate limits were the core of those alarms contributing to that. So that allowed us to make some changes in terms of allowing staff to manage those patients, but also making some changes to the way that we would alert staff on the Brady and the tachy alarms. And we'll get into that in a little bit because tachycardia was an important next step for us along this way. But you can see that those contributed mightily at 62,000 plus pre-pilot, and then it dropped significantly as we went down. So I'm going to turn this over to Deb now, and thank you.
Hi. So I wanted to share with you, as Jim mentioned, the day we went live, the staff, we went live at a noontime. We chose noontime. I entered all the orders to take the patients onto the new order sets. So staff would have orders that reflected, and I'll share some of those orders with you as we go along. And so they were all sure that we were going to have far more crisis alarms, since all these alarms had been warning alarms. And as Jim said, all of a sudden we had a lot of silence on the unit. So it was very striking. But, you know, they were sort of prepared for that. They were surprised. They were very surprised. And one of the things, as Jim shared with you, this was not changing technology. This was changing people and processes. So it was giving them better data, and that's such an important thing as we work with staff, that we could change all the technology in the world, but if we don't change what we changed, which was the people and the processes interacting about the alarms, it would just be bad data in, bad data out, and nothing would be fixed. So what did our staff nurses on the pilot unit wind up saying? Before they said the monitors were an irritant. Now they no longer seem that way. I can spend more time on patient care instead of answering meaningless alarms. You think of almost 90,000 audible alarms per week. You'd be coming out all the time because they're just trying to sort out what's a crisis, what's a warning, what's a foghorn indicating that leads are off, what's a call light. It was, you know, they were always coming in and out of the rooms. I feel so much less drained going home at the end of my shift. This unit is so much quieter than the other units. As a float nurse, I want to work here. I didn't think I would ever say this, but the noise has really gone down. The new telemetry parameters seem to work really well. I didn't think it was possible with all the cardiac issues and so many patients. Great job. And as Jim sort of highlighted, and I just want to reiterate, what were the basic changes besides taking the warning away? So we took warning away from all cardiac alarms. We minimally spread the heart rate limits. We went from 50 down to 45, and we went up on the upper rate from 120 to 130. So that was a very subtle change. The other thing that we did is that we moved bradycardia and tachycardia to a crisis alarm. Crisis alarms don't reset. There's only one thing you can possibly do about a crisis alarm, and that's come out, answer it, decide if it's real and actionable, or decide that it's not for this patient for whatever reason. Say the patient is on beta blockers and overnight are dropping below the 45. So that's one of the things I'll just share with you in terms of that piece. So those were the basic changes. So besides seeing the alarms and what our staff were saying, what happened to Press Ganey? I think every one of you probably have the same struggle that we all have in terms of moving Press Ganey scores. And it was remarkable. We never even went looking after this as a variable. But look at the Press Ganey scores in this period when we went live and after the pilot rollout on this particular unit, and we really moved the metrics. Promptness to call light didn't surprise me because before you couldn't really hear the call light. You know, call lights sort of really got drowned out, as did some of the Alaris pumps alarm, bed alarms. Falls have also gone down. So that's sort of a really interesting piece. Personal domain, I think when people feel that you're not always leaving their room, coming in to start a conversation and going out of the room to go answer an alarm, I think that's really what got at that personal issue domain. And I think it's an opportunity for all of us to really look at what is the correlation of this. One of the metrics things we don't have in here is what was the decibel level on the unit. The unit prior to going live had a decibel level of about 90, which is the equivalent to heavy road traffic throughout it never went away. and then it dropped down into the lower 70s or so, and that was the equivalent to, conversations and louder conversations. The rollout process, so we never discontinued the pilot. The nurses would not let us stop the pilot. They just said, go ahead to the rollout process. And so 7 North, which is the cardiology unit, never actually stopped the pilot, but we did go on to the rollout process. And as Jim mentioned, we were given a $25,000 safety grant from BMC's Quality and Patient Safety, which is really out of the captive. We're self-insured, to fund whatever we wanted to do to roll out this pilot. And what we decided to do was to use super users. So we were going to have dedicated RN super users, peer colleagues, actually roll out this pilot. So while educators and managers and biomedical people and all of us would be involved, the actual teachers would be, the people at the bedside would be one of their colleagues whose only job was to work with them on the pilot, and I'll show you how long they actually spent doing that. We had local champions. Jim and I and several other people were on call 24/7. We were both in several times a day. I'd come back at night just to see how things were going. We developed a SharePoint site in our computer system to have our super users chronicle their observations, so Jim and I always had access to that, as well as to have people go back and say, oh, they've already run into this, this is what we should do. And we had daily tips for staff. Let me share with you a little bit about the order set, because I don't think we have a specific slide of that. That is in the article. The order set indicated what was the indication for telemetry. We then put down the defaults of 45 and 130, which were able to be altered by the ordering provider. And then on the order set, the other really big piece that we did was take those chronic conditions and say, okay, which one should we tell the ordering provider to tell the staff to downgrade for from the time the patient came into the hospital. So those particular ones that we downgraded, so we downgraded chronic non-sustained VT. So if the VT, if patients were having these short runs, say we're a cardiomyopathic patient, known to have these short runs, of 5-6 beats, we would downgrade VT greater than 2, which would have been a crisis, down to advisory, so we could still capture it in our alarm history. VT, which is VT greater than 6, would stay intact, and also ventricular tachycardia and ventricular fib at a crisis alarm. Remember, these patients have ICD, so we've also been known on some of those patients who have a little bit longer runs to take ventricular tachycardia 6 or more down, leaving ventricular tachycardia and VFib, which are sustained runs, obviously still at a crisis level. That requires the permission of the attending or someone higher than a house staff member. The other was AF. AF previously was only a message. It wasn't even an alarm. And you certainly all recognize, I think, the risk of that in terms of having intermittent AF and the risk of developing a clot. So we wanted to be sure that we would recognize that. So we moved AF up to an advisory. We didn't move it to a crisis because of the fact that so many people have chronic AF. We moved it to an advisory so they had it as an alarm. It was captured in alarm history. Clearly, everybody who was reviewing alarm history could see it. But if it was chronic, we wanted people to already know that, and we wanted them to downgrade it to a message. So that also existed. The other thing that existed is patient with known AF, known PAF, paroxysmal AF. If breaks into AF, obtain a 12-lead EKG and take the high limit to 10 above the upper rate until the rhythm is controlled, and then move it back to the default. So those were things that we've built into our order sets and are very, I have to say, really, really well used by our house staff. So what about that actual rollout? What did we do? You can see that we went live in November of 2012. And by February of 2013, we had rolled out. First, the left-hand side is one campus. We as many of you know, Boston Medical Center have 2 campuses in the process of a consolidation in the next few years to one campus. But we rolled out one campus first. We rolled out the Newton Pavilion, and then after Christmas and the holidays, we rolled out the Menino Pavilion. So you can see they had 2 weeks of education by their educator and by us going and doing staff meetings. And then they had 1 week of Go Live support from 7 in the morning until basically 11 overnight. That was including weekends. And then we had a resource person covering them overnight. So that person, again, was a super user RN staff whose only job was to watch them and help them manage the monitor, and also to learn some new tricks about how to use the monitor in better ways, like how to use graphic trends. We taught them all those things as well. We used it as an opportunity to really upgrade how skillful our staff was using the computer system. And then we'd go live with another unit, and that super user would go back and check in. So the responsibility of the super user was always to go back and check in with the unit that had been rolled out previously. And it was a very, really successful methodology. So I'm going to go ahead one slide and then come back to this slide in a second. I want to show you, after we rolled out, what was left of the alarms. We went from about 1 million alarms a week. Here is the pre-rollout for across our Med-Surg units. So this is pre-rollout data, and it was about 1 million audible alarms per week. That is just stunning. Isn't that? I mean, I think you have to say, wow, what is that? After the rollout, our post-go-live data was, we brought it down to about 400,000 audible alarms. Still, I think, an incredible number of audible alarms. So where were they coming from now? They were coming from two real major, or really three things. They were coming from pulse oximetry that I'll talk about in a minute. They were coming only a little bit from non-invasive blood pressure monitoring, but look at this TACI. Look at the TACI data. So TACI data prior to the alarm rollout was about 130,000, and then afterwards dropped down to about 32,000 tachycardia alarms. So now I'm going to go back to the prior slide. So we saw tachycardia as an opportunity. Now, tachycardia, interesting enough, had two alarms on it, right? It had the upper heart rate limit, a parameter limit, that tripped if the heart rate was over 130 for greater than 5 seconds. And then it had this tachycardia alarm on it, also as a crisis, which really tripped with 4 R to Rs, a very short run of SVT would trip that. 4 R to Rs greater than the upper rate. So that seemed to be an opportunity. Why did we need a dual alarm? And it was interesting with our particular manufacturer. I had a discussion with them and I said, why is tachycardia 4 R to Rs at greater than the upper rate and bradycardia 8 R to Rs lower than the lower rate? And they said, you know, that it had not been actual clinicians in that piece of the design. So they realized that that had been a flaw in their software. So we decided to get rid of the tachycardia alarm, leaving the heart rate parameter alarm as a crisis high, but moving the tachycardia, those 4 R to Rs, from crisis to advisory. As long as I had it in advisory, it would still be visible to everybody looking at alarm history. And that's why you see us do that, and that's what that second piece talks about. And then I said to you also that better management of SpO2 alarms. So that's going to be striking. So I'm going to go forward now 2 slides. Actually, let me walk you through the tachycardia first in terms of my data is there for what happened. So after I told you what we did, we went back to our pilot unit. So again, everything we do, we're doing the same methodology. So we weren't just going to make that tachycardia change to the whole institution. We were going to go back and do it to the pilot unit. So we go back to the pilot unit, and you can see that on pre-week 1 and 2, we had a total of about 5,570 tachycardia alarms. And what we then did is that we moved those tachycardia alarms to advisory alarms, and you can see that in the second go-around and in the post-go-live of that, those were about 6,617 alarms that we took away. So about 3,000 additional audible alarms we took away from that unit per week. So the noise dropped, but the alarms didn't change, right? Because we still have those same alarms. We didn't do anything to our short SVTs. We have the alarms. They're captured in alarm history, but we took that noise away. and that was something impressive. So that was really significantly wonderful data. We went back to our hospital leadership team and our nursing leadership team, because one thing about managing an alarm journey, it's never over. So this was on to, as Jim said, our second phase of our journey. We implemented in December of this year, and what we did is we moved that tachycardia on all of our med-surg units down to an advisory alarm. So what we did is we shifted the alarms, and so what you can see is now, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, the crisis alarms were still for the two pavilions about 24,000, but we had moved over 15,000 of the advisory alarm, of the extra alarms that would have been also crisis, to advisory. So we shifted those alarms again, and people are really happy. They think the quality of the alarm history has been just great, and they don't feel that the patient has been compromised in any way. Going on to the pulse oximetry, as I shared with you when we came out of the data for the overall rollout, we looked at what was causing the remaining alarms, because remember we had about 400,000 remaining alarms, right? 400,000 audible alarms. And look at where they were coming from. They were coming from essentially SpO2 low, SpO2 probe off, and pulse search. So we saw significant opportunities. So again, we applied for another $25,000 safety grant, and our pilot, we now have another new multidisciplinary group that is currently looking at defining what the problem is. We have focus groups with our house staff. We have obviously done a lit search. We've done secret shoppers. Again, we just went out and made over 90 observations, and I'll share with you that most of the times when we went out on the secret shopper and they were observing what they recorded, and they thought it was stunning, they knew it was why it was happening, was essentially recording that SpO2 probes were off. So of those 90 some odd observations, they found SpO2 probes off in all but 3. So, again, it's a warning alarm, it self-resets, and people just, they don't, and I think you have to think about this. A lot of these people, as we did it, we also looked at, did they have orders for continuous pulse oximetry? And interesting enough, the majority of these patients didn't even have orders for continuous pulse oximetry. I think you have to realize that your pulse oximetry is probably, as we think here, and as we're 100% sure of here, is being driven by nurses putting patients on continuous pulse oximetry and not being driven by actual orders by house staff to put patients on continuous pulse oximetry. In our focus group for the physicians, they said they think about being on continuous pulse oximetry for rare situations, an unstable airway, high flow devices are on the patient, patients who have progressive neuromuscular disease, patients there is a risk of PCA or epidurals, and finally transport of critically ill patients should be on continuous pulse oximetry. Even the patients that are on OSA, have OSA and CPAP and BiPAP at home, they're not on pulse oximetry at home. Why should they be on pulse oximetry, continuous pulse oximetry here? So our physicians really say, pulse oximetry is really about getting intermittent O2 stat determinations with vital signs in all but a few situations. So we have an opportunity to really change this environment. So that's just sharing some of our data with you, and it's a really phenomenal working group right now. So our strategies, so we're going back to that data, both through the observers and Jim's collecting our data for us again. We're defining who's going to be continuous versus intermittent, looking at the alarm thresholds in terms of the technology, changing our order sets so that there'll be one pulse oximetry order, that if you're ordering pulse oximetry, you're going to have to import it to any of our other order sets. We have Epic, in case you're wondering what we have for an EMR. And I want to share that with you because some people have told me you couldn't make the design changes in Epic for the order sets as we did for the cardiac monitoring. That is an Epic order set. You are able to do it. You just really have to push your analyst to make that happen. And again, educating and disseminating. We set some aggressive goals. We'd like to get more disposable technology, and we'll be able to do that as we get rid of all this reusable technology. If you have a smaller group of patients on pulse oximetry continuously, you can have more sophisticated technology to be able to do that. So we're going to be able to change our technology. What are the key elements to success? And then we'll turn it over to you guys to ask us questions. This is what we think it's about. Establish a broad-based, multidisciplinary alarm work group. Have everyone involved. The more people you have involved, the more services, the better it's going to be. We have surgery. We had, and they were funny on the cardiac monitor. All they cared about was they just wanted to have something that would detect a tachycardia, an upper heart rate violation, to see if the patient was bleeding. That's basically what they told us. They didn't really care about the other alarms so much because those patients wouldn't be on the surgical arena. Whereas medicine and cardiology cared about the other alarms. So having the right people, getting all of their vantage points. In the pulse oximetry group, we're meeting with our surgical leaders on, and I'm sure they're going to have very different needs, like the bariatric patient. We're actually meeting with them next Wednesday. Understand your current manufacturer's alarm defaults, because that may be what you were set at, and that's what we were set at. You need to look at how you're going to standardize those, or how you're going to make those defaults work for your unit. And one of the things I'll share with you, we decided to standardize defaults across our adult medical surgical units. We didn't make them vary from unit to unit. And that's important because our nurses float unit to unit. And it's interesting, this wasn't that surge process that we did. This was not in the ICUs, but now the ICUs have asked us to move the same defaults to the ICU. So shortly we'll be doing that with the ICUs, taking the ICUs all to the same defaults. Extract and evaluate alarm data. Observe staff response to the alarms, because really this is all about the end user. We could change everything as the upper people in the organization, but if you don't have the end users and see what they're doing and what their needs are, it will never work. And that's, I think, a lot of times what's wrong with sustainability. Identify with clinicians, stakeholders, the clinically insignificant alarms. Remove audible notification for clinically insignificant alarms. Choose an alarm setting that requires a staff response. That's the crisis alarm. Standardize alarm defaults, which we talked about, and empower the nursing staff. Look at who owns the monitors. No one owned the monitors prior to going live with this project. Nurses thought they couldn't adapt things because they had to have physician orders. The physicians didn't know how to interact with the monitors, so they were hesitant, particularly if they were on-call physicians, to make any changes that the nurses were requesting. So they took that all away. At Boston Medical Center, only an RN may silence an alarm. So house staff are not allowed to silence. House staff can only go into looking at the events on the monitor. They may not make a change. And then empowering the staff to really manage the monitor. So we did by silencing, and then addressing the alarm. So alarm goes off, the nurse goes, answers it, and it's not a clinically significant event for that patient. What does she do? She looks at, she's been managing the patient, or she has a pretty good sense about what's going on. She and her colleague, she gets another RN, and together they can make a decision to change any of our defaults. They have to let the physician know within an hour in case he has an objection to that default setting. The only exception is changing ventricular tachycardia greater than 6, those life-threatening alarms, and that requires the permission of the attending to do, and that made sense. But any of our others, the upper, the lower limits, those pieces, and they also can't go below 35 without getting permission of the attending. Why do we think our nurses have that capability? To be a nurse at the Boston Medical Center, you have to pass an arrhythmia identification test at a 90% or better. You have 3 opportunities to take that test, and if you don't succeed on the 3 opportunities, that's grounds for leaving the organization. So that's a really important piece and something we share with you. So I'd like to end in terms of turning this back to you. There is a link on the upper right if you want to actually see what it's like. And I want to share with you, just in ending, Liz Kowalski, who did a lot of the Globe work on alarm management. And Liz came to Boston Medical Center and was with us and on December 24th of 2012, we were front page of the Boston Globe in terms of saying, about Boston Medical Center and what we had done. And she said, you really have done it. You've really taken this to a really new place. So that's very exciting for us, and we hope you can find from today some ways that we can support each other's journey as we go forward with alarm management. So I'm turning it back over to the coalition.
Thank you to both Jim and Deb for
The
taking
conference
the time.
has been unmuted.
Somebody check that.
Somebody in front of the monitor is evaluating how storage.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Background?
Can everyone mute your line, please? Seem to have a little bit of a glitch. If people could mute their lines.
I think the problem is somebody's put us on hold.
Yeah. Back in the background. Music.
Okay, well, I want to thank both Jim and Deborah for taking the time to share with us all today their expertise in alarm fatigue and cardiac monitoring. And hopefully we can get some questions here if people have any questions for either Jim or Deborah.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Preston here from Emerson Hospital. It doesn't look like you have a Philips monitoring system there. This is Steve Cunningham from Clinical Engineering. Problem I've run into with Philips is that if you turn off the yellow alarms, those are the not the crisis alarms, you can't record the strips, which is unpopular with the physicians, and there doesn't seem to be a way that we can silence them and still record the strips. Did you deal with a similar issue with the monitoring system there?
No, we use a different vendor, but I think one of the things you could do, Steve, is to look at what the data suggests and then identify those yellow alarms to determine are they significant or not, and then maybe make some default changes based on what the clinical team says. So some of those may be able to downgrade it to reduce the overall number that you see.
Okay.
Talking about the rhythms. You can print them off on Philips, off on the computer. On the lab, it goes to the main printer.
Are there any other questions for Jim or Deb?
I just have a question on the parameters for the stat monitoring, and I'm assuming you're using a GE system?
That is correct. Our
Do you have-
parameter currently is on SpO2 less than 90%.
Okay, thank you.
But we're looking at lowering that based on some discussions with our physician colleagues. They shared with us that when we had the medical focus group with them, they wanted to be notified of a SpO2 consistently less than 88%. But being able to change the default for certain populations, like bariatrics may want it higher, but they thought the overall, in medicine thought the overall notification piece would be a consistent O2 stat less than 88%.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are your alarm orders incorporated into all of your telemetry orders, or do you have a separate order set just for alarms?
Whenever you type in our orders, like an adult coronary syndrome or acute coronary syndrome, heart failure, it appears in there, but at any time you want to place a patient on the monitor, you would type adult cardiac monitoring, the same alarm order set opens up. So we have it both as incorporated within Epic for individual order sets, as well as on open up if you say you admitted the patient already and now you decide you want to put someone on telemetry. And the other thing, just so you know, in order to discharge the patient, automatically discontinues telemetry. So we're working with our health staff to discontinue it before then.
Okay.
Hi, this is Sturdee Memorial Hospital. Do you have teletext or someone actually watching your telemetry?
No, we don't. We chose not to do that. We were looking initially at a war room, but the cost of the infrastructure and supporting that and staffing that was significantly more than we wanted to take on. So instead, what we did was approach it as, let's educate the staff on the proper use of the technology, and then make sure that what we had, we were using it to the best of our ability, because we didn't want to make any additional investments in that.
Okay. My second question is, how often do you evaluate your stored data?
We, on average, will go through quarterly to each central station and download logs.
The patient down, like daily, do they do it every 4 hours? Or?
Oh, for full disclosure.
Oh, for full disclosure, so our staff does it as coming on, and then every 4 hours, and they're responsible for clearing alarm history.
Okay. Great, thank you.
The other thing, the only technology, just to share with you, that we did put on, on our med-surg units at the time that we went live with this, we really only had the central station. So we did add some slave units, and slave is where you can see the rhythm. But
right.
We did put that at either end of most of our nursing units, and they're pretty large nursing units, so the staff really liked that. So that was one of the things that we had done with this. It was sort of concurrent with it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions?
Hi, I have a quick question. This is Kate from Tufts Medical Center. When your nurses discuss with a colleague if they want to change a limit, you mentioned they let the physicians know. How do they do that? Do they put like a verbal order in that goes automatically to them with their change?
They put the request in that they make a change to the order and validate the order, so what they'll do is they'll text Paige and they say that they've made the change to whoever the covering physician, and then asking that they update the order.
Okay.
And then if the physician doesn't want to upgrade the order, then they call back and say, I really disagree with this change. And I don't.
So all of your orders, they specifically list all the heart rate limits, that's all encompassed in your telemetry order?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions?
Hi, Lisa. This is Paula Griswold at the Mass Coalition for the Prevention of Medical Errors. I apologize that I didn't talk about this with you all in advance, but I'm just thinking, I don't know if it's in the survey, but if people listening have ideas of things that they think would be helpful to them, a check-in call in several months among hospitals that are trying this or something, we're interested in hearing suggestions if there's something that would help the field advance this work. So, Lisa, do you know if there's an opportunity? Is there a free text opportunity in the survey, or is there an email we could give people, or what's the best way to solicit suggestions?
No, that's a great question, Paula. Thanks for adding that in. There is an open text field in the evaluation, so that would be probably a great place, and then we can kind of talk about how to get this information back. So good suggestion, and there should be a spot.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Melissa Twami from Quality and Patient Safety at UMass Memorial Medical Center. I'm just curious, and I'm sorry, we had some technical difficulties, so I may have missed this, but did you track anything like code calls or rapid responses to see if there was any sort of risk to the patient, risk for harm?
We did. We looked at all during the pilot, and again, in all all events that relate to codes or to arrhythmias, I also get a copy of in our STARS reporting system, and there have been no events related to alarm monitoring or missed alarms since we went with the initiative. Fortunately, we did not also have a Sentinel event. But only by the grace of God did we not have a Sentinel event, and I know some of you had that, and I had that occur, and I think it's a risk of our systems that we have not. And code blues, interestingly, on the pilot unit decreased 50%, and our rapid responses went up about the same, 50%. So but we didn't look at that specifically.
No,
so
that's helpful though. Thank you.
Yeah. I found that, I have to say anecdotally on 7 North, that's where I spend a lot of my time. I saw people really responding to things really, really quickly, which has been, much quicker than before, I think. That there's just that, that sense of, and they own the alarms. They really own the alarms. It's their job to manage it, and I really see them doing that. Before, one of our physicians said he couldn't even round over there. It was just like continuous noise, and now all the physicians are back rounding. Today there were walking rounds on the unit. You know how difficult walking rounds can be to begin with a group of house staff, but it was quiet enough they could do walking rounds.
I think the other thing is with with staff looking at alarm histories at a prescribed interval, they have a better idea of really what good alarms are happening, and allows them to build a better profile of what may be at risk, as opposed to just trying to better through 100 alarms and 89% of them are garbage. So there's better data available for them to make decisions.
I can get an anecdotal story about that. It was really interesting. A couple of weeks ago, one of our patients has a lot of sort of non-sustained VT, and the nurse had a patient for 2 days, and she said that this non-sustained VT is really different for this patient. Yesterday it was 2 and 3 beats. Today we're now 6 and 8 beats. But on the actual communication on the team, when they were rounding, it had been, the team was talking about non-sustained VT and not the gradient variation. And once the nurse said that, they realized something was going on, and they actually mobilized really quickly for that patient, and something was going on. So I think that, because they own it, they're really much more quickly responsive to things that are happening.
So just to clarify, is that happening when they're clearing the alarm history? They're actually reviewing the alarm history at the same time?
Yeah, they're reviewing the alarm history, but also a lot of times when they answer an alarm, they go back and see, is this the type of alarm that this patient has been having?
Okay, thank you.
And they also have learned how to use the full disclosure page, so they can go quickly back and say, well, what were they doing yesterday? I don't remember them doing this yesterday, so they can go back to the full disclosure page. So those were all the things we taught them when we went live with the initiative. Before, they would just look at the event and use the paper, but now they know how to go in and actually print off the system, use the graphic to be able to tell, is this a science tac or is this an SBT?
I'm sorry, would you be able to clarify for us, what is the full disclosure page? Is that specific to Philips?
I'll let Jim tell you what that is.
That's sort of it almost looks like a halter. So it provides all of the waveforms associated with that with little markers. So when an event occurs, you can go to a marker in time, which would correlate with the alarm history, and you could go back and see what the rhythms occurred at that time.
It's called FD on the GE system.
What was it called on GE?
FD.
Full disclosure.
FD. Thank you.
Yep. All right.